The golden afternoon sun spilled through the wide windows of Madame Efua's mansion in the quiet suburbs of Kumasi. The air smelled of jollof rice, roasted chicken, and celebration. Laughter echoed through the grand hall as relatives in colorful Kent cloth moved from table to table, greeting each other, taking photos, and teasing about who had gained the most weight since the last family gathering. At the long dining table, Chinedu Owusu sat quietly, smiling politely. He was 24, freshly graduated from university, still trying to figure out his place in life. Compared to his loud, confident cousins who bragged about their new cars and jobs, Chinedu felt invisible. He didn't mind much, he preferred to observe. His grandmother, Madame Efua, the matriarch of the family, sat at the head of the table in a gold-trimmed dress, her posture regal, her eyes warm but sharp. Across from Chinedu sat his father, Kofi Owusu, tall, proud, and always in control. He laughed louder than anyone else, telling stories of his business success and how well he took care of the whole family. Every few minutes, he'd clap someone on the back or raise his glass in self-praise. Chinedu just smiled, nodding quietly. He didn't want to draw attention. But beneath the laughter, there was something else, a quiet tension only the older family members seemed to sense. Madame Efua kept glancing at Kofi, as if she knew something no one else did. And as the plates were cleared and dessert arrived, she leaned back in her chair, eyes twinkling. Chinedu didn't know it yet, but the peaceful lunch was about to turn into a storm, one that would expose secrets, shake loyalties, and change his life forever. Dessert was being served when the real drama began. The dining hall buzzed with light chatter and laughter as servants placed bowls of fruit salad and warm sponge cake on the table. The sweet smell of vanilla filled the air. Chinedu sat beside his grandmother, grateful the lunch had gone smoothly so far. He was just about to take a bite when Madame Efua leaned slightly toward him, her gold bracelets clinking softly. Her smile was warm, but her eyes carried something deeper, something sharp. "So, Chinedu," she began in her calm, melodic voice, "you've been receiving the $9,000 monthly transfer, right? I hope it's helping you live comfortably." The entire room froze. Forks stopped midair. Even the ceiling fan seemed to slow down. Chinedu blinked, confused, unsure if he heard correctly. What $9,000, Grandma?" he asked, his voice quiet but clear. Madame Efua's smile faded, and her expression shifted from warmth to concern. The silence grew thick. Everyone at the table turned to look at Kofi, Chinedu's father, who suddenly looked like he'd swallowed something bitter. His hand tightened around his fork, and the metal clinked sharply against his plate. Across the table, Auntie Alma coughed awkwardly. Someone whispered a prayer under their breath. The cheerful noise that had filled the house just moments ago vanished completely. Even Chinedu's mother, Adwoa, looked uneasy, glancing nervously between her husband and his mother. Kofi forced a laugh, trying to sound casual. "Oh, mother, you must be mistaken," he said, waving his hand. "There's no need to confuse the boy with such talk." But Madame Efua didn't blink. "Confuse him?" she repeated slowly. "Kofi, the transfers were arranged through the Owusu Trust, directly into his account. For 3 years now." Her tone was still calm, but everyone could hear the edge in her voice. Chinedu's heart started to pound. 3 years? $9,000 every month? That couldn't be right. He remembered all the times he had struggled to pay rent in Accra, skipping meals just to stretch his small allowance. He remembered asking his father for help, only to be told, "Money is tight right now. You need to learn responsibility." His chest tightened as realization began to form, but he pushed it away. "Grandma, I swear, I've never received any money. Not once." His voice cracked slightly. Madame Efua turned her full attention to Kofi now. The tension was unbearable. "Kofi," she said softly, "what is my grandson talking about?" Kofi shifted in his seat, pretending to look at his phone, then set it down. His jaw clenched. "Mother, you must be mistaken about the account details," he muttered. But no one believed him, not even his wife. The silence that followed felt endless. Somewhere in the distance, a glass fell and shattered, as if the house itself could feel what was coming. And in that moment, everyone in the room understood one thing. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was the beginning of a revelation that would tear the family apart. The air inside the dining hall turned heavy, almost frozen. No one dared to move, or even breathe too loudly. The only sound was the soft hum of the ceiling fan and the distant clinking of dishes being cleared in the kitchen. Madame Efua slowly leaned back in her chair, her gold necklace catching the light. Her eyes, sharp as glass, moved from her grandson to her son. "Kofi," she said slowly, her tone calm but filled with quiet power. "Are you telling me Chinedu hasn't received a single cent from his account?" Kofi's throat bobbed. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. "Mother, I think there must be some confusion," he muttered, forcing a weak smile. "Confusion?" Madame Efua repeated. "For 3 years." Her voice was gentle, but it sliced through the air like a knife. Adwoa, Kofi's wife, sat stiffly beside him. Her face had gone pale. She whispered, "Kofi, please tell her the truth." But Kofi didn't respond. He just stared at his plate, avoiding every gaze around the table. Chinidu could feel his pulse hammering in his ear. He looked around the table, his aunts whispering to each other, his uncles shaking their heads, his cousins wide-eyed with curiosity. "Grandma," he said slowly, "I swear, I didn't even know about any money. I've been broke this whole time. I thought Dad was helping me when he could." Madame Efua's expression darkened. "That money," she said, "came directly from the Owusu Business Trust. It was meant for you, Chinidu, your education, your future, your independence. I set it up after your grandfather died." The room filled with gasps. Everyone's attention snapped back to Kofi. "So," she continued, her voice trembling slightly now with disappointment, "if you didn't get it, then where has it been going?" Kofi finally looked up, his face flushed with embarrassment and fear. "Mother, please, don't do this here," he whispered. "It's a private family matter." "This is a family matter," she shot back, her voice suddenly firm, "and I intend to understand it fully." A tense murmur spread through the room. Some relatives shifted uncomfortably. Others leaned forward, unable to look away. Chinidu felt like the floor had been pulled from under him. His mind raced back. All those nights he stayed up worrying about rent, skipping meals, taking part-time jobs, while his father had been living comfortably, saying times were hard. He stared at his father in disbelief. "Dad," he said softly, his voice breaking, "you told me you were struggling. You told me we had nothing." Kofi's lips parted, but nothing came out. That silence was louder than any confession. It filled the hall like a scream no one wanted to hear. Madame Efua sat back slowly, her face unreadable. "I see," she said finally, her voice low and cold. "Then I suppose we'll let the truth speak for itself." And just like that, the birthday lunch had turned into something else entirely, a courtroom without walls, where lies were crumbling in front of everyone's eye. Chinidu couldn't take it anymore. The room felt too small, too heavy, too full of eyes staring and whispers floating like smoke. He pushed back his chair quietly, murmured a soft "excuse me," and walked out before anyone could stop him. As he stepped onto the porch, the warm Kumasi air hit his face, but it didn't calm him. His chest felt tight, his heart thundering as if trying to escape the pain building inside. He stood under the big mango tree in the yard, staring at the garden lights flickering softly in the evening air. The laughter from earlier had turned into faint murmurs inside the house. He took a deep breath, but it only made the lump in his throat heavier. His father, the man he had trusted, respected, defended, had been lying to him for years. He thought about all those nights in his small university hostel when he'd counted coins to afford a meal. He remembered the months he couldn't pay rent, the embarrassment of borrowing from friends, the times he wanted to quit school because things were too hard. Every time he asked for help, his father would sigh and say, "Son, times are tough. Be patient. You'll understand when you're older." And all along, the money was there. His money. His fists clenched as the truth sank in. His father hadn't been struggling. He'd been using Chinida's inheritance to keep his business afloat, to maintain his comfortable lifestyle, to keep up appearances. Chinidu had been eating instant noodles while his father was throwing parties. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was the betrayal, the way his father had looked him in the eyes and lied without a flicker of guilt. That realization cut deeper than anything else. The man who taught him about honesty, discipline, and family pride had stolen from him like a stranger. A tear rolled down his cheek before he could stop it. He quickly wiped it away, angry at himself for crying. "Why, Dad?" he whispered. "Why would you do that to me?" He thought of his grandmother, her kind eyes, her faith in the family name. She had trusted her son to protect her legacy, not to exploit it. And now, because of that misplaced trust, everything was broken. Behind him, the muffled sound of voices grew louder. He could hear Madame Efua's calm but firm tone, and his father's defensive voice rising in panic. But Chinidu couldn't go back inside yet. He needed a moment, to breathe, to think, to stop his heart from breaking further. As he stood there under the fading light, one thing became clear in his mind. The person he had always tried to make proud wasn't the man he thought he was. And that night, under the quiet Ghanaian sky, Chinidu realized that trust, once shattered, could never be rebuilt the same way again. Inside the house, the air was thick with silence. The birthday cake sat untouched on the table, its candles half melted, as if even they were too afraid to burn. Madame Efua sat in her high-backed chair at the head of the table, her face calm but unreadable. Her guests whispered nervously, some pretending to check their phones, others looking anywhere but at her. Everyone knew she was furious, but the kind of fury that didn't scream. It was the kind that could destroy quietly. Kofi sat 2 seats away, his eyes fixed on his hands. He didn't dare meet his mother's gaze. Adwoa, his wife, kept dabbing her eyes with a napkin, whispering prayers under her breath. The sound of the ceiling fan seemed louder than ever. Finally, Madame Efua spoke, her voice soft but firm. I trusted you, Kofi, she said. That money was meant for your son's independence, for his start in life, and you took it. Kofi lifted his head quickly, trying to sound calm. Mother, please, he said. You're misunderstanding. I didn't take anything for myself. I used the money for the family, for all of us. You know how difficult business has been these past few years. Her eyes narrowed. Family needs, she repeated. So tell me, which family need required over $300,000? Kofi swallowed hard. Investments, he muttered. Temporary transfers. I plan to return it once the company stabilized. You know I've always handled our finances responsibly. Madame Efua didn't argue. Instead, she reached for her phone and spoke to her assistant in a low, steady tone. Get Mr. Mensah, my lawyer, and Mrs. Opoku, the accountant, on the line immediately, she said. Now! Everyone froze. Even Kofi's confident expression faded. He knew what was coming. Within minutes, her phone buzzed on speaker mode. The lawyer's voice came through first, polite and cautious. Yes, Madame Efua? I want to confirm the monthly transfers from the Owusu Trust to my grandson's account, she said calmly. And I want to know exactly where they've been going for the last 3 years. There was a pause. Papers shuffled on the other end. Then came the answer. Madam, the funds have not been deposited into the beneficiary's account. All transactions were redirected to a private business account under Mr. Kofi Owusu's name. The room went dead silent. Kofi's face turned pale as if all the color had drained from him. Adwoa gasped, covering her mouth. The cousins exchanged shocked looks. Madame Efua didn't flinch. Thank you, she said to the lawyer before ending the call. Then she turned her gaze back to her son. Her voice was still quiet, but her eyes burned. I built this family's name with honesty and hard work, she said slowly, and you've stained it with greed. Kofi tried to speak, but no words came. Madame Efua stood up, her golden wrapper glinting under the chandelier. You've not only betrayed your son, she said, her voice trembling with pain. You've betrayed me. And in that heavy silence, Kofi realized something he had never felt before, fear of his mother's disappointment. It was worse than anger. It was final. The peaceful family lunch had completely fallen apart. What had started as laughter and celebration was now chaos and heartbreak. The dining room, once filled with the smell of food and music, now echoed with raised voices and crying. Kofi sat stiffly in his chair, his face red with anger and fear, while his mother's calm gaze stayed locked on him like a mirror he didn't want to face. Adwoa couldn't take it anymore. She broke down, covering her face with both hands. Please, she sobbed. Let's not do this here. This is a family gathering. We can fix this later. Please, Mama Efua, please. Her voice trembled, desperate to stop the storm before it got worse. But Madame Efua didn't even look at her. Her focus was fixed entirely on her son. Fix this, she said softly. You cannot fix betrayal, Adwoa. You can only confess it. Kofi slammed his palm on the table, his frustration spilling over. Enough, he shouted. I am the head of this family. I had every right to manage those funds. Everything I did was for this family's future. The room went completely still. His voice echoed through the hall, bold but shaky. Some of the older relatives bowed their heads, whispering quiet prayers in Chui, hoping to calm the spiritual tension that now filled the space. Madame Efua didn't flinch. Her voice, once warm and steady, turned cold as stone. You didn't manage it, she said slowly, her eyes locked on him. You stole from your own son. The words hit like thunder. Everyone froze. Even the servants standing by the doorway exchanged shocked looks. Chinita sat at the end of the table, his hands trembling under the tablecloth. He wanted to scream, to ask his father why, but his throat was too tight. He looked at Kofi, the man who had once carried him on his shoulders, who used to tell him stories about honor and family. Now all he could see was a stranger hiding behind pride and excuses. Mother, you don't understand, Kofi said, his voice cracking. Business has been difficult. I was trying to protect our legacy. The money was still within the family. Within the family? Madame Efua repeated, leaning forward. Do you call theft protection? You've taken your own child's future and called it management. You used deceit and called it love. Kofi's eyes filled with frustration, but he had no answer. Adwoa reached out, grabbing his arm. Kofi, please stop, she whispered. You're only making it worse. Tears streamed down her face. The family elders started praying louder, their soft words mixing with the sound of distant thunder outside. It felt as if even the sky was reacting. Chinita finally stood up, his eyes glassy. He looked at his father, then at his grandmother. I don't even know what to say anymore, he whispered. Everything I believed about our family, it's all a lie. No one responded. The house that once held laughter now felt like a courtroom, and Kofi sat in the middle, guilty, ashamed, and stripped of every excuse. The silence that followed was heavier than any punishment. The tension in the house hung like a storm cloud. No one dared to speak after the confrontation at the dining table. Then, without raising her voice, Madame Effua stood up and said firmly, "Everyone move to the main hall." Now, her words carried a weight that no one could argue with. The family followed in silence, their footsteps echoing against the marble floor. The main hall, usually a place of joy and family gathering, felt like a courtroom that afternoon. The portraits of ancestors on the walls seemed to watch silently, as if waiting for justice to be served. Madame Effua took her seat in the large carved wooden chair at the front, her posture straight and regal. Chinidu stood quietly behind her, still trying to process everything that had happened. Kofi lingered at the back of the room, his shoulders tense, his face pale with worry. Adwoa clutched her handkerchief, eyes swollen from crying. "Today," Madame Effua began, her voice calm but sharp, "I have seen something I never thought I would witness, betrayal from my own blood." Her gaze swept the room, resting briefly on Kofi. But when truth walks into the light, lies have no place to hide. The hall was silent. Everyone listened. Even the children, who didn't fully understand, stood frozen beside their parents. She continued, "From this day forward, Kofi Owusu is suspended from all business operations within the family group. He will no longer manage or access any trust or company account." Gasps filled the hall. Kofi's head shot up, eyes wide. "Mother, you can't do that," he shouted, his voice breaking. "Everything I've built, everything I've worked for, is tied to those businesses." But Madame Effua didn't even blink. She lifted a hand, silencing him instantly. "What you built," she said, "was a wall of lies. And today that wall falls." The family lawyer, Mr. Mensah, stepped forward, holding a folder. "Madame Effua has full legal authority over the Owusu Trust," he said clearly. "Her decision stands under both family and corporate law." Kofi looked stunned, his body trembling. "Mother, please," he whispered, "don't do this. I'm your son." She looked at him, eyes full of sorrow but no hesitation. "Yes," she said softly, "and that is why this hurts me most. But a son who steals from his own child cannot be trusted with what this family has built." She turned to Chinidu, her voice steady again. "From this moment, the Owusu Trust will transfer directly to Chinidu. He will take full control under my supervision." The crowd murmured in disbelief. A few relatives began clapping quietly, their admiration and relief clear. Chinidu stood frozen, his eyes wide with shock. He hadn't wanted revenge, he'd only wanted honesty. But now, justice had found him in a way he never expected. Kofi sank into a chair, defeated, his head in his hand. The mighty businessman who once commanded every room was now silent. Madame Effua rose to her feet, her voice softer now, but filled with finality. "This family's name will not be carried by greed," she said. "It will be carried by truth." And as Chinidu met her eyes, he realized that in one afternoon, everything had changed. Not just the money, but the balance of power, the meaning of legacy, and the lesson of what true justice looks like. Within a few days, the story spread across Kumasi like wildfire. What had happened inside Madame Effua's mansion became the talk of the town, whispered in cafes, discussed in business meetings, and even gossiped about at church. Everyone knew Kofi Owusu, once one of the city's most respected businessmen, had been exposed by his own mother for stealing from his son. At first, Kofi tried to keep his pride. He told friends it was all a misunderstanding, a family issue blown out of proportion. But soon, the truth came crashing down. The bank launched an internal investigation after Madame Effua's lawyer filed a formal report about the irregular transactions. Statements and receipts didn't lie. Over $300,000 had been funneled into Kofi's private accounts, money that never belonged to him. One by one, his business partners began cutting ties. Contracts that were once easily signed started getting delayed. Invitations to events stopped coming. His phone, which used to ring nonstop, became silent. His so-called friends disappeared overnight, pretending they didn't know him. The man who once walked through town with confidence now moved quietly, avoiding eye contact. He had become a ghost in his own city, a social pariah. Back at home, Chinidu struggled with conflicting emotions. Everyone congratulated him for getting justice, but he didn't feel like a winner. He had inherited money and a company, yes, but he had lost something far greater. Every time he thought about his father, a cold ache settled in his chest. How do you forgive a man who betrayed your trust so deeply? One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Chinidu sat on the porch of the mansion, staring at the garden lights flickering in the distance. Madame Effua joined him quietly, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders. For a while, neither of them spoke. The night air was warm and still. Finally, Chinidu broke the silence. "Grandma," he said softly, "I know justice was served, but why doesn't it feel good? I thought I'd feel relieved, but I just feel empty." Madame Effua nodded slowly, her wise eyes filled with understanding. "Because justice is not the same as peace," she said gently. "You've lost something that money can't replace, trust. And when it's broken by someone you love, It doesn't heal easily. He looked down at his hands, struggling to hold back tears. I just don't understand how he could do that to me. She reached over and placed her wrinkled hand over his. My son, people can lose their way when greed blinds them. Blood can betray you, she said softly, but truth will not. Truth always finds its way home. Chinita looked up at her, eyes glistening. For the first time in weeks, he managed a small, tired smile. In that moment, he realized something important. The legacy his grandmother wanted to pass on wasn't just about wealth or business. It was about integrity, courage, and the strength to choose truth even when it hurts. And that, he knew, would last far longer than any fortune ever could. Weeks passed, and slowly the storm began to calm. Madame Effua's mansion, once filled with tension and whispers, started to feel alive again. The air no longer carried the heaviness of betrayal. Instead, there was a quiet sense of rebuilding. Chinidu, now officially in charge of the Owusu Trust, began each morning in his grandmother's study, learning the ropes of leadership from the woman who had built everything from the ground. Madame Effua sat beside him every day, her reading glasses perched on her nose, guiding him through business reports, property deeds, and investment plans. But her lessons were about much more than money. Numbers will tell you how much you have, she said one morning, but integrity tells you who you are. Under her mentorship, Chinidu found new purpose. He didn't want to just run a company. He wanted to use the family's wealth for something meaningful. With Madame Effua's blessing, he launched a community program to support young entrepreneurs in Ghana. The initiative provided small loans, business training, and mentorship to talented youth who lacked opportunity. The first workshop was held in the family's old warehouse, now transformed into a bright, modern training center. As dozens of young men and women arrived, carrying notebooks and hope in their eyes, Chinidu felt something shift inside him. This, not wealth, not revenge, was what legacy meant. Madame Effua watched proudly from the front row as Chinidu spoke. When I was younger, he told the crowd, I thought success meant having more than others. But now I know real success means lifting others with you. His words earned quiet nods and warm applause. Over the next few weeks, their project gained attention. Local newspapers wrote about the Owusu initiative, praising how the family had turned scandal into service. Donations came in from other business leaders, inspired by Chinidu's humility and determination. For the first time in months, the Owusu name carried respect again, not because of money, but because of the values behind it. Then, one Sunday afternoon, something unexpected happened. As Chinidu returned home from a meeting, he found his father, Kofi, standing by the gate. He looked thinner, older, a man crushed by guilt and regret. For a long moment, neither spoke. The wind rustled the trees, and the silence between them felt heavy. Finally, Kofi stepped forward, his voice trembling. Son, he said quietly, I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I was blinded by pride. I thought providing meant controlling. I was wrong. Chinidu looked at him, the man who had taught him ambition, but also caused him deep pain. He took a slow breath and said softly, You taught me how to chase success, father, but Grandma taught me how to earn respect. Kofi's eyes filled with tears. He nodded, unable to speak, and turned to leave. Chinidu didn't stop him, but he didn't hate him either. That chapter was closed. As the sun set over Kumasi, Madame Effua joined her grandson on the balcony, watching the golden light spill across the city. You did well, my boy, she said with a proud smile. Chinidu smiled back. We did it together, Grandma. And for the first time, it truly felt like the beginning of something good, not built on money, but on honor, healing, and the kind of legacy that lasts forever. The day of Chinidu's first big presentation finally arrived. The same dining hall that had once been filled with silence, anger, and betrayal was now glowing with light, laughter, and purpose. Fresh flowers lined the long wooden table, and banners with the words Owusu Initiative, Building Futures with Integrity, hung proudly on the walls. Madame Effua sat in her favorite chair, dressed elegantly in gold and white, her smile warm and proud. She watched as her grandson stood confidently before the gathered guests, community leaders, young entrepreneurs, and family members who had come to celebrate a new beginning. The tension that once lived in that room had been replaced by hope. Chinidu spoke with calm strength, his voice steady. This project is more than business, he said. It's about giving others the chances we were given, and learning that real wealth is not what we keep, but what we share. The crowd applauded, and Madame Effua's eyes glistened with emotion. She saw in her grandson everything she had dreamed of: wisdom, kindness, and courage. All the pain, all the betrayal, had led to this moment of truth. As the music swelled, Chinidu looked toward his grandmother, smiled, and said softly, When my grandmother smiled that day, I didn't know it was the smile of truth, the kind that burns lies away. The camera would pan slowly across the hall, the shining faces, the golden light, and finally the grand family portrait of Madame Effua and Chinidu standing side by side. The same home that once echoed with secrets now stood as a symbol of justice, healing, and legacy. And in that moment, the story of the Owusu family found its perfect ending, not in wealth, but in wisdom that would live on forever.